Welcome to Afterthoughts, everybody. This is the podcast where we watch a movie and give you our thoughts afterward. I am your host, Michael Dixon. With me, as usual, John Garcia. How's it going, John?
Hey, it's going well. I'm sad that Ryan couldn't be with us. I was actually thinking we should all take a moment of Martin Scorsese silence for him.
I think we should. Let's pause for 2 hours and 41 minutes.
Yes.
And we have a guest on the podcast this week because Ryan could not make it. We have our good friend Parker joining us. He was on our Dungeons and Dragons episode.
Hey, how's it going, guys? Good to be back.
That's right. He's here to talk about more mythology. Dungeons and Dragons. So
Yeah.
There's probably a lot of similarities between like a dungeon master and a priest, you know?
Yeah.
Creating stories and leading people toward...
Oh, man.
I don't know.
This movie would have been so different if Chris Pine had been at the film.
At the end of the day, it's always a power trip, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we are going to talk about my favorite movie, Martin Scorsese's Silence from 2016.
Our Lord said to them, "Go ye into the whole world and preach the gospel to every living creature."
Ferreira is lost to us. He renounced God in public and surrendered the faith.
That's not possible. Father Ferreira risked his life to spread our faith all over Japan.
It seems to me that our mission here is more urgent than ever. We must go find Father Ferreira.
This is in your hearts, then, both of you?
Yes.
Then I must trust God has put it down. The moment you set foot in that country, you step into high danger.
The price for your glory is their suffering.
It's too dangerous.
We asked for this mission. But I'm lost. Am I just praying to silence?
John, you have been encouraging me to pick this movie for the podcast for probably years now, and I've always been reluctant to do it because it's kind of an intimidating subject matter for me to tackle. It's a movie that has had a really profound impact on my life. It's a story of two Jesuit priests from Portugal who go to Japan in 1640 in search of their mentor, Father Ferreira, who has reportedly apostatized and given up the faith publicly and adopted Japanese culture and lifestyle. And this is a great shame upon the Catholic Church, and they are determined to figure out what has happened. Historical context here in 1600s Japan, they are seeing Western colonization and expansion go across the globe. They see in other countries, they send the priests first and then the soldiers, and they start oppressing people after they have converted them to their religion. And Japan is kind of isolated on this island, and they want to stay that way, and they don't want to give up their culture, their religion, their identity, and their sovereignty to a Western country and Western culture. So there's this huge culture clash, and the Japanese government, in response to this Western colonization, has issued an order that any Christian should be killed on sight or tortured or forced to recant the religion. And that is the environment in which these priests go into. There's Father Rodriguez, played by Andrew Garfield, and Father Garupe, played by Adam Driver. Ferreira is played by Liam Neeson. So We are drinking some whiskey while we record this episode. It's a Japanese whiskey called Shimata Ryukyu whiskey. Is that correct?
Add a little
John?
more Texas twang on that.
Yeah.
Shimata Ryukyu? Yeah.
Great.
That's right. That's exactly right pronunciation.
So this is a Japanese whiskey that is aged in white virgin oak. And I thought this would be an interesting whiskey to drink while we talk about this movie, because it's basically the opposite of Silence, where Silence is about white virgin souls that enter a Japanese environment, and this whiskey is Japanese spirit that has been inserted into a white virgin environment. So it's kind of the opposite of the movie. So
it's a good twist. Nice.
But yeah, so this movie really impacted me a lot. I saw it when it came out in theaters in early January of 2017. This was right after Trump was elected, and I was kind of at a low point spiritually and emotionally in my life. I grew up in an incredibly conservative Christian evangelical environment. Went to college at UT, but I was in a Christian fraternity there and had kind of purposely kept myself inside of the Christian bubble for kind of as long as I could. But as I became an adult and lived life outside of that, I was having a lot of doubts about my faith. And then when Trump got elected, I had like a huge reckoning with the church and Christianity. And, like if this faith that I have believed in my whole life can do something that I am so morally against and promote a person who has no real shared beliefs with Christianity.
But he sells Bibles, Dixon. He clearly loves God.
He did hold up the Bible that one time.
He said it was his favorite book, but then he refused to cite any verse because that's a personal thing to share.
The interview with the guy's like, what would you say your favorite verse was? And he's like, I'd probably say all of them.
Yeah. So many good ones, I don't know which one to pick.
2 Corinthians, is that the one you like? So I was kind of like going through a kind of a personal crisis as all of this was happening, and like looking back on that, it seems a bit naive, but that was like really weighing on me heavily at the time, and I had been kind of beginning to doubt my faith over the preceding couple of years. And then I saw this movie and decided to skip church one Sunday morning and go to see this movie instead, and was definitely by far the most spiritual, profound experience that I have had in my life was watching this movie for the first time. There's a Killer Mike song that I really like called Rap Music, where he says, I've never had a religious experience in a religious place. The closest I've ever come to seeing or feeling God is listening to rap music. And that's kind of how I feel about the films of Martin Scorsese. And this one in particular, I think, is just such a profound religious experience, and it really made me kind of, I was already questioning my worldview and where I was in life at that point and where I was going, and the movie, it doesn't necessarily provide answers, but it I think it talks a lot about the value of doubt, right, and how that is actually very important to living an honest life and to being able to converse with other people and understand them. Like, you have to have some level of doubt in your own worldview and who you are. And watching this movie made me come away much more comfortable in my doubt. And I have changed a lot since then, like in my religious and political views. And I think this movie was like a catalyst for me to become okay with my doubt, and instead of viewing it as a weakness, like I was feeling incredibly guilty at the time because the church is very against feeling any doubt. It's all about, no, this is true, you have to believe it, and if you express doubt, it's a sign of weakness and a sign of sin or a sign of shame. And that's what I was feeling at the time. And I came out of the movie being like, you know what, this is actually good and healthy for me to be experiencing this, and I need to pursue my own path of truth and figure out what I believe in the world and kind of separate myself from this structure that I had been a part of my whole life. So, it's hard for me to talk about this movie objectively because it is so personal to me, but really interested to hear what you guys think of it. So,
yeah. Well, I know I've only seen this movie, I think, once before. Technically, I watched it halfway through with Sasha, and she gave up on it because she was in a different headspace when we started watching it. And I could tell because when we got to a really emotional scene where they had microphone issues, we all know where that one was. I think you can probably hear it. She was like, oh man, they just did a terrible job with the audio right here. And I was like, okay, there's like a way more serious thing happening on screen. That's like way more, there's a lot more gravity to this than somebody really just botched the boom mic that day. I don't
even know what scene you're talking about. Like the movie is so like transporting to me.
Did you not? Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I absolutely mentioned it on our watch.
Yeah. Parker looked directly at me and was like, is something going on with your audio system? And I was like, nope, that's the mics that day. That's because they're actually out at sea and doing this. And I was like, okay. But yeah, I just talking as somebody who was raised in the Catholic Church, Parker and I went through the same Catholic Church and catechism together. I never really felt the love of the Jesus that everybody sings about in like the big mass distributed VHS tapes where they have people dance and sing like I love Jesus and he loves me. I was just like, why? I don't understand where that love comes from. And like I'd heard, I guess like all the days that I spent doodling in mass on like the back of checks because my mom would just give me that because I was bored and I'd be like, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what the church is for. It just like became clear to me that whatever the education system is that the Catholic Church thinks they have, they really don't have a good grasp on like how to get people engaged anymore. And like it feels to me like a lot of the main sequence in this movie, one of the sequences I always remember is when Padre Rodriguez is like telling the like Japanese villager, like, you can trample, it's okay to trample. Like, it's totally fine to basically deny your religion to survive. And I was like, I feel like that's the motto now of like most Catholics is there's just kind of like, yeah, if it gets in the way of your comfort or your life, like, it's fine. Like, you can always repent later. And to me, that's such a conflicting thing that really defeated my journey through the church. That and some other people that were in my same class telling me that I was going to hell because I had doubt. And I was like, well, I don't want to be a part of this community if they think I'm heretical for just being like, why are we doing this again? Can somebody maybe walk me through in a way that I understand? So coming into Silence, it was like, okay, there was just like so much pain in it. It really emotionally moves me to think of like the futility of a lot of what like Padre Rodriguez is trying to do, put up against all the suffering that he is causing. And that whole sequence between him and Liam Neeson towards the end when they're talking about like what it really means and how like he's kind of on this power trip of becoming Jesus, like the pride he has for himself and his religious belief. And I was just like, this absolutely is everything that I don't like about organized religion and the constant pushing of like how you should live your life and how pious you should be and like how you should sacrifice relationships. Reminds me of like more hardcore fundamentalist churches that'll actively like say if your family member, one of them starts disbelieving, like you cut them off entirely. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. None of this does. So Silence is just another notch in like media that I've read and consumed that I actively love because it complicates religion and it doesn't outright say it's bullshit and it doesn't say that like you should abandon your faith at the end of it. There is a headier reflection on what does it mean to you to believe in one like form or another. How can you be true to your faith and your and like make that distinction between you and your religion? So I wouldn't say that I can't objectively assess parts of it because I did notice some editing issues here and there. And
How dare you say anything bad about Thelma Schoonmaker?
Well, it's clear that some days they just didn't have all the takes they wanted. And I was like, it's fine. It's still going.
Those jump cuts.
Yeah, some of the jump cuts. I was like, all right. This totally, I think that it's still an impeccably made film and it's a very personal film and it goes up there for me with, The Last Temptation. I think that these are both definitely movies that you can feel it's a one for me for Scorsese and that he gets to kind of do what he wants to. I just love the audio mix too. Like when Parker and I sat and listened to it, the ambience was fucking great. Like anytime that they needed to pull everything out or put like elements of crickets and cicadas and whatever back in, it kind of carried you like with it.
That opening scene where they start with just like a black screen and crickets and then they hard cut to silence and they put silence title card on there. It's like a really powerful way to open up the the film, and this sets like the sound design is setting the tone from the first minute.
It's a great natural
absolutely.
overture, like a cool Foley overture to intro things with. But anyways, I love the movie. After seeing it for a second time properly and getting to watch it with my best friend that I grew up with in the church, I think that it was a much more personal experience and made all the more difference. But it's one of those things where, like, I had never had the same belief and faith that you did, Dixon. And so at the end of the movie, I was like, I don't know how it would feel to sit in a theater and see this and have it like rock your world and completely just shatter a lot of like what you, or just it resonated so hard that it shattered you out of something.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that it did, that you love it and that you're here.
Man.
But yeah, Parker, what did you think?
So this is my first time watching this movie, and just like John said, you know, we grew up in the church together, literally, and it definitely was an experience. The movie is it very much draws you in. The cinematography is absolutely amazing on it.
Yeah.
And then whenever you combine that with all of the audio and sound, that, you know, when they get it right, it really pulls you in. Yeah, no, religion with me is it's not too complicated. At least I didn't think it was whenever I was younger. But, you know, whenever you get older, you realize that was kind of naive. Growing up, I kind of felt like I didn't pay attention like John in church. Catholic Church is not great at that. Yeah. And both of our parents had us go to what's called CCD, which is like pretty much Sunday school for everyone else. And it is a kind of just a way to try to like indoctrinate you a little bit harder whenever you're a little bit younger. And it leads to this thing called confirmation in Catholic Church, where, you know, you actually become like a full adult member of the church. So it's like it's a very weird thing where your parents want you to go through it. And so you feel kind of obligated to go through it, at least in my perspective. That's kind of how I felt about that whenever I was going through. And watching this movie, I just like the first like good third of it was me just thinking like, oh wow, okay, so this is absolutely why I started to feel disconnected from the church. And like, these guys are idiots, they just need to turn around. I don't know why they're trying this hard. But then at the end of the movie, I definitely like changed my tune quite a bit. I thought about like you know, just like we were mentioning, the change that you go through in your quote unquote religion to try to accommodate the world around you. The world is always like an adjusting, changing, moving thing. So we have to, you know, we have to adjust with it. And it's really crazy just like seeing the perspective of these hidden Catholics, as they were called, I think, living in Japan and like having to just, you know, do what they thought was like Catholicism and going to trying to practice a religion that they pretty much tertiarily knew. Like they didn't have any kind of priest. They didn't know what was like mass. They didn't have scripture. No, yeah.
I don't even think they knew Latin. They just sat there and probably waited for it to be done. Yeah. And they were like, oh, hey, here we go.
Exactly. They knew Portuguese, so they knew like a couple of like root words, possibly, maybe. Yeah. And then like they knew confession and like that, like they could do that as a thing.
Yeah.
But it was pretty crazy. I thought about like how growing up, I kind of just, you know, I changed myself. I pushed myself through church just to appease my mom, you know, and try to get her love and acceptance, even though I already had it. It wasn't like, you know, do this or you're ostracized from the house. Yeah. Luckily, Catholicism isn't too bad about that. They'll take anyone, and nowadays they're kind of fine if you leave. They don't. They're a little sad about it, but you know they're not Jehovah's Witnesses or anything.
They're not excommunicating people anymore.
Exactly. You're like, you know what? Us and our family, we're not talking to you anymore. No, there wasn't anything like that, so I didn't feel like too much pressure. But I just wanted to do it to like, you know, just show her that like I was doing something that she cared about, and I thought about Father Rodriguez's relationship with what was Liam Neeson's character's name? Ferreira. Father Ferreira, and how he was doing this pretty much all to appease his ideas of what Ferreira thought he should be doing. And it's pretty crazy. It's interesting if you think about, like, if Rodriguez thought he was Jesus, does that mean that he was, picturing Ferreira as his God at the time and his search for some kind of like answer to God's prayer?
Yeah. I mean, Ferreira was not there for the entirety of the movie until he finally finds it. It's like the same thing. He says that he doesn't hear anything from God. It's just silence. And that, like, his struggle, there's that whole sequence where he kneels at the creek and sees his face, and his face turns into the face of Jesus, and then turns back and he just starts laughing like hysterically. And
he finally got his wish.
Yeah, and it's his trial and his mission, and him and Father Garupe just like both talk about wanting the mission. I think that Rodriguez talks about wanting it more. He's like, this is what we wanted. This is what we've like been pushing to get. Now we have our chance to prove ourselves. And that's just one of those things that it reminds me of, like, any other kind of there's this eagerness that people have to prove themselves to something they're convicted to, like anybody who owns a gun probably is like, I want to be the good guy with the gun.
Yes.
Like, oh man, if something broke out, I would be ready.
I'm there.
And it's that same thing of like, you never know until you're tested, and people were like, come on, test me, send me to war, like I'll fucking show you what I can do if I go to war. And then they come back and it's completely different, and they did not expect what that would be. And so, yeah, like it's interesting to watch this ideal and ideology sort of crumble in both Ferreira and Garupe's mind as they go. And like, for Garupe is so convicted that he, eventually just dies trying to fight that system instead of like actively caving to it. And, Rodriguez takes the other out of just, okay, I'm going to apostatize, but I'm going to be really quiet about like continuing to practice here and there.
Exactly.
Very, very quiet about it. And like, I think at one point, is it that Ferreira says like, only God knows your heart, or God can judge your heart, something like that. Yeah. And it's very much that of like, it's wild. There's so many machinations that are like set up from different political systems to gauge like how good of a citizen you are, how loyal or devout of a follower you are to this religion. And I remember my dad, even though he sort of pushed me through the Catholic faith and getting confirmed, I had like a whole heart-to-heart with him where he like basically was like, you just got to do it for your mom and me. You just got to do it. Even if you feel like you're lying to a whole community, which is a fucked up thing to do. He was like, just do it. So that we'll have peace of mind that your soul is saved, I'm not even going to try to unpack that table.
Oh yeah. We don't even need to talk about the fact that like we were both baptized at birth, which means that our soul was already saved technically under the belief. So.
Yeah, we're not going to purgatory with all the other unbaptized babies.
Yeah, no. Just because we're not confirmed, that just means we can't go back into the church. Oh God. No.
Yeah. And so just like that whole, I remember him saying that, but at the same time, he was also like, hey, who wrote the Bible? Like, he was quizzing me about it. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, when I was a dumber kid, I was like, well, like, God wrote it, right? And he's like, no, like, men wrote it. And men are susceptible to corruption. Men are susceptible to injecting their perspective and their opinions and their bias into the words of it. It's like the wisest thing my dad's ever told me, to just separate me from religious text and be like, if anybody tries to use the Bible to tell you what you should or shouldn't do and you feel like it's wrong, that person is also a human being and not God.
Yep.
And I was like, damn, all right, that makes sense. And that kind of pried me from a lot of, like, we've had a lot of different priests that were not good and had a lot of their own opinions. One of them was like 120 years old, and every time he genuflected, he thought he died on the floor of the church. But like, he definitely had some old world, let's do Latin again, and all the women need to wear like, less revealing clothes and whatever else. It's like, it just at odds with cultures and such. So just watching that journey here, wild. I don't know, Dixon, you haven't gotten a chance to really jump in and talk a little bit more about it. Did you have any particular points you wanted to take us through?
Yeah, I think so many things, but I think one of the movies that this silence reminds me of that I also really love is Apocalypse Now. And I think is an interesting comparison there where Liam Neeson's Ferreira is like the Colonel Kurtz, who is, Brando out in the jungle that like Martin Sheen is trying to get to the entire time. And kind of in both cases, you're told at the beginning of the movie what this person is, but you're still like in anticipation of like, I don't know if that's true. I need to find this guy and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And then you find him and it's like, oh shit, this is exactly what I was told would be the case. And you have the main character kind of reckoning with how they understand the world and life and existence. And I think it's a really interesting kind of comparison to look at those two movies, where it's like you wouldn't, say they're about the same thing necessarily, but they're movies that are both incredibly well done about like somebody kind of questioning who they are and journeying through a foreign land to find a certain figure who they think is going to have the answers, and then they maybe don't have the answers at the end of the day. So yeah, I know, John, you haven't seen Apocalypse Now, but
sorry.
Yeah, Parker, have you?
No.
Well, you should both watch Apocalypse Now. I think like the core of the movie to me is really about perspective, like, and trying to understand other people for who they are and where they come from, right? And it's like you have this kind of consensus Western Roman Catholic idea of what Christianity is, and the church is determined to spread that idea around the world, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like Jesus says, go out and spread the gospel to all nations, and they take that to mean our understanding of the gospel, right? And it's like, that's understandable, right? That's the only thing they know. That's what they know the gospel to be, and so they go out and spread it to people, and they think they are doing the work of the Lord. And they're very prideful about, facing trials and risking their lives and trying to convert people and bring people to Christ. And there's this like martyr mentality in the church, right? Of like, oh, well, if I'm doing things for the Lord, that means I'm a good person and I'm like, going to have a better place in the afterlife, right? Like there's the idea in Christianity that a lot of people don't really talk about outside of the church, where it's like, yeah, there's heaven and hell, but in heaven there's a class system, right? So where if you're better in this world, you can get a higher post in the afterlife. If you're a martyr, you're going to be like one of the best people and have all the best things in heaven. And like when you think about it, it's very materialistic, but only in the next life, right? And they go into Japan with this idea, and they encounter a culture that is completely opposed to that idea. And they never stop to think, is this message like right for these people in this culture? Is it something that they would be receptive to? Is my understanding of the gospel even like, is that universal, or is it something that like maybe in this culture they have different ideas about the world, and maybe we can both learn from each other, right? Like there's a line where the interpreter tells Rodriguez, we had our own religion. It's a pity you didn't notice it. Yeah. And, they think like, well, we have the answers to all the world, and we think truth is universal. And so therefore it, whatever's true in Portugal is true here. And we have to make you guys understand that. And it's just a fascinating, situation where neither side wants to hear the other, right? You have these conversations between Rodriguez and Inoue, the guy who is kind of leading the movement to get rid of Christianity in Japan. Yeah, the Inquisitor. And neither want to hear the other person, right? They're both, Rodriguez at one point says like, you're not going to change my heart, and it seems like I'm not going to change yours. And they both kind of throw, like theoreticals at each other and talk about, well, here's why this is true, and no, here's why this is true.
The doctrine you bring with you may be true in Spain and Portugal, but we have studied it carefully, thought about it over much time, and find it is of no use and no value in Japan.
But we believe we have brought you the truth. The truth is universal. It's common to all countries at all times. That's why we call it the truth.
I see you do not work with your hands, Father. But everyone knows a tree which flourishes in one kind of earth may decay and die in another. It is the same with the tree of Christianity. The leaves decay here. The buds die.
It is not the soil that has killed the buds. There were 300,000 Christians here in Japan before the soil was poisoned. You have no reply. And why should you? You're never going to change my heart. And it seems like I am not going to change yours.
They don't ever like seek to learn anything from each other. And I feel like that's just very emblematic of our modern society, where like everybody takes their ideas of what life is and like you graft that into your own identity, right?
Yep.
And you're just like, I am this thing. I am a insert ideology here. I am a liberal atheist. I am a conservative Christian. And therefore, like when you start calling yourself something, it becomes, if you admit that you're wrong, it's a sign of weakness, or that there's something wrong with you personally, right? And I think this movie and the story is a call to like think, hey, maybe like it's okay to admit that you might be wrong, and to just have an open mind about, you know, hey, like let's try to learn about the world together, and you may think one thing, I may think another, and like maybe we can both learn something from each other. Maybe I'm not going to come away convinced that you're right. Maybe you're not going to come away convinced that I'm right, but we can at least respect where the other person is coming from and try to have a dialogue that results in each of us coming away maybe a little bit wiser than we were before. And, you know, I think that's just something that it's hard for humans to do, right? It's just not human nature to be like, yeah, maybe I'm completely off base on this. Let's have a conversation and see how we're going. But like, if you don't go into a discussion with that idea that you might be wrong, then there's no point in having the discussion, right?
It's bad faith.
Yeah.
At that point, and it's emblematic of like, was it when they had that debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham, like however many fucking years ago? And at the end of it, like, because Ken Ham has set up a creationist museum somewhere in fucking East America.
Incredible. I think it's in Kentucky, right?
It's in Kentucky. Yeah, it's like a big ark or something.
Yeah, they have like a fake Noah's Ark.
Yeah, there you go. And they have like the fucking humans riding dinosaurs or some shit.
Yeah,
I don't know.
they show how God put fossils in the ground.
Yeah. But yeah, like he agreed to do a debate with Bill Nye about science and religion, and Bill Nye brought up all of the fucking science points, which Bill Nye, you know, he's a pop culture scientist. He's a Neil deGrasse Tyson type. Yeah. I would say Neil deGrasse Tyson is a him type. Like...
Why are they both so into bow ties?
I don't know.
I think it's nerd look.
Yeah, it's that nerd look.
Yeah. And they're from the 80s, you know?
They don't have to look corporate. They just have a bow tie.
Yeah, to look like a child. And
That's right. Young Sheldon.
As someone who wears bow ties, I take offense.
They look good on you, Parker. For Bill Nye, it's his brand. But
exactly.
Yeah, like at the end of that like debate, it's like an hour and a half or something, and Bill Nye is like, "All right, well, I want to ask a question. Like, what evidence would get you to change your mind?" And Ken Ham just says nothing, and and everybody's like, "All right, why did we come here today?" And it's really goes back to thank you for smoking. It doesn't matter about you and me. It matters about them out there and whether they like chocolate ice cream or vanilla. And if I can just whataboutism you until I get enough followers to support me, then my creationist museum will get more money and all this other shit will happen, and I can just double down. That's the other interesting thing about religion is like almost any religion probably starts to feed from and has fed from other religions and other mythologies.
Always.
And you just like, instead of admitting that, hey, this is wrong, let's remove that, except for the Mormon church, which did admit that black people were not cursed by God in the 1970s.
As they should.
Every
that's
other
before
church,
some Southern evangelical churches.
True.
There's like that whole aspect of a lot of pagan holidays were adopted by Christian like religions, and they're just like, yeah, let's do like Christmas. Fuck it, that's the same thing as this. And you start to get that amalgamation of we're just going to take this and we're going to retcon part of our religion and be like, oh, this is actually when this happened. So like, let's just say that. And instead of anybody acknowledging it now, everybody's like, let's do Christmas in December. And every time that they start talking, every time Christmas rolls around, I see the same articles come up where they're like, well, actually, the North Star would have been in the sky at this time of year. And I'm like, nobody gives a shit about that. Who celebrates Christmas? They clearly don't care.
Oh, man, I love Christmas. I'm telling you, corporate Christmas is the best.
Corporate Christmas, yeah. Hampton DeVille loves corporate Christmas.
Let me celebrate consumerism in peace.
It is great. Oh man, but yeah, no. Going back to the Bill Nye debate with what's his name, it's much more. It's the same thing as martyrdom, you know. Like they feel like the church is always going to gain a lot more momentum if more eyes are seen on it, and so anything that can be pushing that can do that. So whenever they go to the pagans and they say like, hey, that Christmas, that thing, no, that's actually whenever Jesus was born. That's when that's when we celebrate this. You should celebrate with us.
More around your mythological figure has done a lot, and you make them. That was another thing I've learned in Greek myths. Anytime that a hero arrives in a story, usually they get another hero to like cameo. It's like having The Rock come into Fast and Furious, and you're like, oh my god, like, hey, they're both in the same universe, so it must be even cooler to be part of the Fast fan club,
right? Let's build that momentum.
But yeah, and so like watching Garupe and Rodriguez go through Japan and talk to these different. They're doing like the different sacraments. That scene where they do confession, where that woman comes and is talking to Garupe and is like telling him everything in Japanese, and he's like moichido, and it's like the only word that he really knows is like one more time, like just tell me again. He wants to at least seem like he understands what she's saying.
Yeah.
And it's really more of like, you just go through the motions, and then you can be like, there you go, you've confessed, you're good. I thought that part was perfectly emblematic of what we've been through in the Catholic Church too. You're taught the motions, and then as long as you do them,
you're good.
You're good, like fine.
And yeah, Kichiro.
You're gonna get it.
Yeah, so Kichichiro's character was definitely like just wanting to go back and get forgiveness over and over and over again. That was obviously like the point of his character, to show that like, hey, it's this guy that like, to him, religion is like, I can go and just do some shit that's fucked up and then come back and just like, pray my sins away immediately. And like, he obviously feels like the Catholic guilt about it, but he's doing what he has to survive every single time. And then he comes back and just asks for forgiveness, so that way, and then he kind of gets like addicted to that forgiveness,
I feel like he gets it though. I feel like he gets the religion. Like, he gets like,
he almost understands it better than Rodriguez.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it is the religion like of Japanese Catholicism at that time, like that is how those people are practicing it. And they're looking for confession. They're looking for being able to.
It's so interesting to watch Rodriguez go through his martyr trip. He wants to be a martyr. He wants to be the hero. That's the whole reason he went on the Odyssey to begin with. Was him and Garupe are going to be. It's just two padres going to an island alone.
A two-man army.
After Liam Neeson is taken, two padres show up and they have to save
two
him.
brothers.
Yeah, exactly. And,
even the poster is that.
In Portuguese, Catholic, Japanese adventure club, two padres who are just padres, regular padres. That whole sequence of like, that is honestly probably my favorite thing about Silence. The favorite relationship is Kichichiro and Rodriguez's relationship, because there's such a strength there that Kichichiro is. For everything that Rodriguez talks about being the mission and what he's the test that God is putting him to, Kichichiro is the strongest test, I feel like, for him.
Yes.
Because it is to teach him something. Like Kichichiro's relationship with him is to teach him about his own religion, to teach him what his faith should mean. Because every time that I think that like towards the end when Kichichiro comes to get like imprisoned with him and is begging him to do confession one more time, and he has that monologue about, he's like, this like wretch comes to me and he's not evil. I know he's not evil, but like he's so annoyed and so put off by the fact that he keeps seeking confession for like very egregious betrayals that are visible and he's like not registering it, because it just, to me, it speaks to this passiveness everybody else thinks confessions are for.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you confess, then you think that you would learn. But no, we're all taught as children to just say you're sorry before you understand what you're fucking sorry for.
Yeah.
And Kichijiro is the greatest example of somebody who is actively giving into their weakness. They know it. They can't help it. And he is trying to reconcile it. And towards the end, there's, you know, that kind of beautiful somber moment where he is just taken away for winning something in a gambling. Like, he lies too. He's like, I don't know how I got this amulet.
And it's just in a bag.
And it's just, in a bag around his neck. And he's like, I don't know how I got it. And he kind of swears that, but he's taken away anyway and kind of persecuted for that. It's just something that, like, there's sort of a moment of, did he wear it on purpose? Did he really not know? I would like to, it's still sort of interpretive in a way to tell you like what his arc is, because you've heard him say so many other times, maybe I'll have the strength, maybe I will. And we see that after he's begged for another confession when Rodriguez is apostatized. And so to me, I'm like, well, he has to have known. It has to be
absolutely.
that, like, he just doesn't. Yeah. And so,
he never stopped practicing. I mean, because he changed to conform to fit his religion. You know, like he did what he needed to do to survive and continue practicing his religion. And like it's weird because they show Japan as like not caring. They're like, you know, if you just apostatize, we're fine. We don't care. Like, and it just means nothing.
Yeah,
he keeps telling
a formality. Just step on
exactly.
the thing. It's just
it's just a formality
made by man. It's not a big deal. We just want you to do it.
You can go about your lives. We don't care anymore, you know, but don't keep any other like pieces around. And he keeps, you know, but it's pretty, blatant that Rodriguez has to like see him as like the common man, the everyday man, as, you know, the masses. And then he feels so wronged by it because it's like Kichijiro wronged him personally. Yeah. And so because of that, he has to forgive him, and he just feels so, you know, conflicted about it at first, but then realizes that, you know, that's not his, it's not his judgment to, or it's not his spot to judge, you know.
He comes to peace, and understands it. But
I think it's interesting how like Kichijiro starts out as the kind of Judas figure in the story, and Rodriguez starts out as the Christ figure, and those roles kind of change as the movie goes on. And I think Scorsese seems very interested in Judas, you know, given his filmography and the movies that he's made. Like Last Temptation is kind of recasting Judas as, you know, a person who did what he had to do. Like in that movie, Jesus tells Judas, you have to turn me in because I have to die to fulfill like what I'm here for, my purpose, and to save the world. And, you know, rather than Judas being an evil betrayer, he is Jesus's closest friend who is doing that because he's been asked to. And like there's a concept in Christianity called predestination that, you know, it's like some people believe that God has preordained literally everything and that you can't there is no free will. You just have to do what you're programmed to do. And, you know, if that is the case, then how can you blame Judas for doing what he did? How can you convict anyone for anything in that case, right? And so I think it's a really interesting way to view Judas. And then, you know, you have Kichijiro who like sells Rodriguez to the Japanese authorities for 10 times what Jesus was sold for.
30 pieces
300 pieces of silver. And immediately asking for forgiveness as Rodriguez is being carted away by the Japanese authorities.
Padre, forgive me. Padre! I pray for God's forgiveness. Will He forgive even me?
And, you know, you view him as this, like, you know, evil guy, but then as the movie goes along, you kind of start to, like, have some empathy for him, and he's kind of becomes the everyday Christian who is always sinning and asking for forgiveness. And you wonder how much priests view normal Christians as Rodriguez views Kichijiro. Like, really? You sinned again? You did that same thing that you always do when you come here every week or however often.
You went out drinking
confession.
again. Cool.
Yeah, you did all that shit that I told you not to do and that I gave you forgiveness for last time. You're asking me for forgiveness again, you son of a bitch. Like, you have to imagine that attitude is there to some degree toward everybody. And then you have this guy who, seems to fervently believe and to want forgiveness, but continues to just commit awful acts of betrayal and sin that, you sometimes in the movie you feel very judgmental towards Kichijiro, and other times you're like, man, like I get it, like he's in a really tough environment, and he tells Rodriguez at one point, Rodriguez is like, you're not hearing me. Like, why do you keep doing these things? Do you even believe? And Kichijiro says, you're not hearing me. Like, why did I have to be born at this time? I'm a weak man. And if I was born 50 years ago, I wouldn't have to deal with any of this. I could have lived a good Christian life and died happily and not dealt with any of this persecution. This is really unfair. Why do I have to go through this? And, I just think that relationship is so fascinating. And then, like, Rodriguez, as the movie goes along, has to do what he's seen Kichijiro do so many times and renounce his faith. And, he has to then kind of recontextualize what he's seen Kichijiro doing and understand him a little differently and have some empathy for what he's been going through. And, the pain and suffering that is being inflicted upon the Christians there is not something to just kind of wave away and be like, whatever, you should have been true to your faith. Like, it's some real shit that they're having to deal with, and very understanding that they are willing to publicly renounce their faith and then go back and continue to privately practice it in order to not have themselves killed, but also their family and their neighbors as well. Whenever they were apostatizing,
Rodriguez immediately started to hear the voice of God finally, after all of this strife, right before he was pretty much, forced to apostatize. So it is pretty interesting to think about, do you think is he thinking at that time, did all of the people behind me, all of these other people that were Christians here, do the exact same thing as me and just, finally find God and find a reason to be able to put my foot on this plate right now? Was that the changing moment that made him realize, maybe we can be a little bit more gray. We don't have to be so black and white about this religion. We can open up a little bit more. Because at first he was very open to other people apostatizing to save themselves, but he still wasn't open to doing it himself. Yeah. Until it finally came down to it.
It's because he never got the hierarchical structure of what he could do as a padre. He just didn't understand until, he was shown by Ferreira that it wasn't that, because the movie opened with that fucking really haunting sequence of those priests being tortured. Where they're just let's just go get boiling water and put it over slow spouts and roast these. And they volunteered to do it to show how strong their faith was, and were actively tortured and killed for it. And then after that, the Japanese government learned you can't martyr priests.
Exactly.
You need to have them surrender their faith in order to, actually regain control over any of the Christian people, the Christian population.
That it all depends on you, whether they are set free. If you say just one single word, show them. Deny your faith.
So what if I refuse? You kill me? The blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. Just like the priests you slaughtered in Omura and Nagasaki.
We learned from our mistake. Killing the priests and killing the peasants makes it worse. If they can die for their God, they think it only makes them stronger.
If you feel you must punish someone, punish me alone.
Oh my one, you do not speak like a good priest. If you are a real man, a truly good priest, you should feel pity for the Christian. Isn't that so, Padre? Isn't that so? The price for your glory is their suffering.
And so it became much more like when they're watching the three men after Kichichiro like kind of gives up and runs away the first time, I think, when they're kind of caught in that village, the three men that get like put out to sea and are effectively crucified.
Bearing on the cross.
Yeah.
They're crucified in
Crucified.
the ocean, and
Yeah.
like the rising and lowering tide, and having to deal
Jesus.
with water coming over their heads.
That
and
fucking scene.
4 days.
Oh my god. And like
the actor who plays Mokichi, by the way, holy shit, he's
Yes.
so good, and
Kills it.
he's the director of Tetsuo Iron Man.
That's
Did you know
amazing.
that?
Oh, that's
shit.
awesome. I did
That's
not
really
know
cool.
that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Tsukamoto?
Yeah,
Oh, so
Tsukamoto.
sick.
That's him. And he, Scorsese cast him in that role, and like, holy shit! Like the whole cast of this movie is fucking incredible.
phenomenal.
So like, I continue on your point, John. But I just wanted to call that out. Like,
but it very much is that like, the complexity of God teaches you in like a lot of people talk about God's teachings as, we need to help the other people that are in need. But the same person who says that takes, like 2 steps to the right around a homeless person in the street. Like there's those kind of, that conflict, that inner turmoil of like, well, they got there somehow and I can't really help that. But here you basically have Rodriguez applying the same mentality to any of the Christian people because he considers himself to just be like at a flat level with them. He's like, I have no power over them. I just deliver the sacraments and I do all of the things that save their souls, but I have no power over them. And so when he's like watching with Garupe and they're out at the ocean, he just watches in horror and he's like, yeah, it took like 4 days for them to die. And there's nothing that we could do. And like, there's that scene later where they have the pit and they're hanging all those people up and fucking draining their blood so that they don't die
as fast.
And he's like, he starts screaming like, apostatize, like just do it. And he's still not getting it, that he's seen people apostatize every step of the way and they still get whatever it is that because it's performance art. It's
exactly
entirely performance art of just like, we just need to know that you abide by our power structure. You would give people up for us and you would do these things because we need to assert as the Japanese government that you're not going to fuck shit up under like the Christian banner, form alliances and rebel against your own people and all that shit.
That's the reason that they started this, right? There was a rebellion?
There was something related to like there was just too much of a grasp on like it is that colonialism. Like they recognized that this was a step toward, hey, not only is our culture being taken over, but also our trade routes are eventually like military forces would be coming.
Yeah.
There is so much within those relationships. And they talk about it in the story later when Inoue is talking about the 4 concubines.
Yeah.
And that's just like a great this is a great little aside, that whole conversation. But anyways, to not derail, like Padre Rodriguez only at the end realizing that he did have power, he could have stopped this at any point and he didn't. To me, that his like last moment of stepping on the figure of Christ is very much akin to a public crucifixion. It's in a much more spiritual sense. Like you are, and that's why he hears that voice of God of like, I've like been with you every step of the way. Like I'm suffering with you as well. And it's a painful moment for him and he has to do it. But that was like the task. It wasn't to give himself up physically. It was to give himself up spiritually to save other souls and lives, literally. But yeah, that journey for Rodriguez, to me, just so every step of the way I see the same thing like repeated. It doesn't have to be in Christianity. Just a lot of people in general are like finding mechanisms to dissociate themselves from being able to help others, or like just, at a company too. I saw this in a corporate way as well. Oh no. It's like, it was just a terrible thing to think, but literally it is like, what if I'm asked to do this thing for the company? And it's like, trample, like just trample, like fucking lie, whatever you need to do to survive.
You have to bend over backwards to make sure you're able to earn an income and survive.
Exactly. There's a bit of that. It's just like, that complexity is explored in great depths here. And I loved sort of being every step of the way with Rodriguez in it. I actually forgot that like halfway through it just becomes Rodriguez's story. Forgot he was the main character from the first time I saw it. So like initially I was like, I don't remember how far the two priests make it. And the moment that group is like, all right, we're splitting off. It's like, oh yeah, okay.
Oh, he gone.
Yeah. He lives a totally different life. Garupe was a hothead as well. I don't know what his journey would have been, but
well, he looks emaciated at the end there, so he's obviously feeling it.
He had a rough time.
Yeah. I mean, and they, like Garupe is kind of the different type of priest where he is just like, I'm never going to recant. I'm never going to trample on the image of Christ. I'm going to hold to that to the very end. And like, we see the implications of that, right? Like there are 4 or 5 Japanese Christians who are murdered right in front of him because he won't renounce Christ. And Rodriguez is shouting at him. They make Rodriguez watch from too far away where they can't hear him. He's just yelling, apostatize, apostatize. And Garupe won't do it, and instead has to see these people murdered and tries to swim out to save them, but he's just too weak at that point to do anything, and they're just able to drown him. And he gets that martyr's death that he wanted, and Rodriguez sees how useless that is.
Yeah, very like foolish.
How little it solves. And then when he is approached with the same scenario, decides to make a different decision there. And I think when he does apostatize and step on the image of Christ, it's just such a powerful scene, the way that it's done. And I think when they cut all the sound when they have God speak.
Come ahead now. It's all right. Step on me. I understand your pain. I was born into this world to share men's pain. I carried this cross for your pain. Your life is with me now. Step.
And the voice of God is Ciarán Hinds, who plays Father Valignano at the start of the film, who is their mentor who sends them off to Japan. And so I like that ambiguity where it's like, is he actually hearing the voice of God?
Yeah.
Or is he just hearing what he wants to hear from, the voice of his mentor in the church? Like not Ferreira, who turned away, but a different mentor who is still, in theory, fighting the good fight and being a part of the church. And he is, is he hearing God, or is he imagining that he has been given permission to do this? Who knows? But I think his decision to do it is so fascinating to me because, like, in theory, the message of Christianity is love and compassion, right, for your fellow man. And, there's a conversation with the interpreter earlier in the film where he's like, hey, Buddhism is the same thing. Like, the whole point of Buddhism is love and compassion, and to learn to love each other. And, hey, we can actually learn from each other. We don't have to, obviously there's a lot of hypocrisy in that statement because he's part of the effort to murder Christians. But there is truth there, right? Like, hey, maybe we can just learn from each other. And, we both want to love other people and learn how to be better human beings. Like, why don't we, have conversations and study together and try to learn more about the world and how it works. And Rodriguez has to come to terms with the fact that his Western idea of Christianity maybe isn't right. Maybe it's not correct universally. Maybe it's just not correct there in Japan with that specific culture, but he has to admit that. And one thing that Ferreira tells him before he steps on the fumie is, you are about to commit the most painful act of love that has ever been committed. And that's a bit of an overstatement, right? But I think it's like you were saying, John, that may be more painful for him than
to the priest death. It is. Yeah.
Right. Like he is, he has been prepared to think of himself as Christ. Like, I would go through whatever and I would die in order to, to prove my love of Christ or whatever. But when instead of his own fate being at stake, it's other people's fate, and other people might die instead, he has to learn to show the love of Christ by renouncing Christ. And it's such a, an interesting concept to me, where he has to do the right thing by doing something that is against everything he has ever learned in the church. And the way that he can best show Christ's love is by renouncing Christ and doing something radically different. And it's his doubt that allows him to do that, right? He has to come to terms with the fact that, like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my idea of Christianity is not right in this circumstance, and I need to adapt and do something to help and save these people here and to show them the best way that I can Christ's love. And I think that is just a fascinating idea, and something that, like, that scene just sits in my mind all the time. And it just thinking about, like, in any situation, I try to approach it like, okay, I might be wrong here. What can I learn from whatever is going on? And, the minute that you decide that you're right is the minute that you stop being able to learn and grow and progress as a person, right? And as long as you have some sort of idea that, hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I can learn from whatever's going on, you can continue to grow and develop. But I feel like the church in particular, the modern church today, it's like the Protestant church has fucking thousands of different sects, right? And different denominations, and they all are like, we're right and you're wrong. And there's so much certainty in all of this. And, maybe the world would be better with a little bit more humility and, like, hey, this is what I think. Maybe you could give me some wisdom in what you think, and I could learn something.
It also comes just from a natural predilection, I think, for most humans to reduce things into, like, the binary black and white, the false dichotomies of, like, right and wrong. And that's the whole reason why, like, most Christians can't explore Judas as a complex character, because we need a bad guy. We need bad guys. We need good guys, and that's why the Marvel movies are
going to picket outside of Last Temptation screenings and burn down the movie theater because we haven't seen it, but we've heard it's bad.
Exactly. It's you tell us what's bad, and we tell you, okay, we just don't want any of that. And it's the moment that you draw a line in the sand and you say, I'm not moving beyond this line. Everything, like, that I am and here where I am is right. Then you start looking for how you can other any other people and how you can make them enemies and how you can make them lesser than you, because it justifies where you're at and what you're doing. And you don't have to change, because change is scary to people and it requires effort.
It's existential in some cases, right? It's like, if you have to question your foundational beliefs, that's fucking terrifying, right? And like, for Rodriguez, that's scarier than death, and for a lot of people it is, right? And it's so comfortable to fall back on the belief system that you've grown up with, or that you have adopted as an adult, or wherever you have come to get to whatever you believe now. It's so hard to change that, right? It feels like you're betraying yourself and that you're admitting flaws about yourself. And it's a fucking scary thing to do, right?
Oh, yeah. No, evangelicals or any Christians really will, like, use the term cafeteria Catholic as a derogatory term to like symbolize, like, Catholics who are in mass. There's a lot of Catholics in the country. And a lot of them not, like, consistently practicing, not going to church every single day. And so because of that, they see them as, like, less faithful, less, believing in God. They don't adhere to the strict rules. They don't adhere to every specific thing that the Catholic Church states. So even, like, inner Catholics will, kind of, like, turn their noses up at that kind of idea. And it's just a way for, like, the common people to be able to, continue practicing, like, their faith, but in a way that is, suitable for their everyday lives, instead of having to believe that, like, homosexuality is wrong and that you can't eat shellfish and different weird rules like that.
You shouldn't mix linens. Like, you're not supposed to.
You're Fridays.
You're supposed to spit your seed into the belly of a whore before you spit it onto the ground.
What verse is that?
That is in the Bible.
You're not.
That's like some Leviticus shit, right?
That's some Old Testament shit.
There's like that other one where it's like a man who has no genitals can't enter the church anymore. Like you get castrated or some shit.
If you're castrated, you're gone.
Did the Catholic Church, like, literally make eunuchs for their choirs?
Yes, they did. Absolutely,
they
did.
Them in the church.
Because they were the best, the best singers. Get them while they're young and their voice boxes don't change. It's pretty cool. and what, like, you know, like, again, like, you know, Christians just want to ignore the fact that, like, Judas is constantly described as Jesus's best friend throughout the Bible, like, and that he was very close to Jesus throughout, like, their couple of years going around as disciples and whatnot. But just to, like, say, you know, like, don't change our perspective of the bad guy. We want to be mad at him.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, you know, to some degree, it's like that is a cathartic experience to feel mad at somebody.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
You're people say getting your anger out or something like that, but it's not actually changing anything. And, you know, it's people were just about their lives doing their things. And, you know, sometimes 30 pieces of silver is a pretty nice little deal. No, I'm kidding. That's terrible.
Yeah, like it reminds me of our favorite show, Moral Oral.
Oh, yes.
There's that episode
where
the episode where the Jewish man gets they have like a bobblehead of Christ, and it gets embedded on his body, and it becomes infected. And he's in the hospital. And Oral's like, I really wish I could help him, but you're not supposed to, you know, like remove the face of Christ from anything.
Oh, yeah.
And so his dad's like, Oral, let me tell you about something we call bending the rules, so you don't break them. He was like, let's hypothetically say that you happen to leave like medicine near him within arm's reach, but you never gave it to him. You didn't help him get that medicine. He got the medicine for himself. And like that becomes the whole message, is that sometimes it's okay to bend the doctrine, but not break it. And it is that ambiguity that the reason why we have so many Protestant branches of the church
people wanted to change the rules.
There's no ambiguity and everybody wants to change the rules. And if you're not allowed to do that, then you're like, well, fuck you. I'm going to go make my own church. And it's going to have all the right rules. It's going to have the exact same copy paste of yours, but also this.
We're looking at you, Lutherans.
Yeah. No, honestly, like that exact thing you're talking about was like a lot of the reason I was having kind of an existential crisis and doubting myself before the 2016 election. Like, I grew up and my dad was constantly trying to find a church that believed everything exactly as he believed it. Mm-hmm. And he saw the church as less of a community of like-minded people and more of a, like, I need people who will teach me the thing that I already know so that, like, my kids will grow up believing the right things and all of that stuff. And, you know, it's not really possible to find a church that believes everything the exact same way that you do, right? And like the whole, you know, it's like the Protestant Reformation, you know, it happens once and then it happens a million times after that, right? Where it's like, you know, if you're at and I've seen this experience myself where like, if you're at a church that believes, you know, they have their 24 points of listed dogma, and then if you publicly question one of those points of dogma, they say, hey, that's fine. You can believe what you want to believe, but you need to be quiet about it because, you know, you can't refute what we say. You know, we need to be unified in our message, and you can't be disagreeing with that. Even if it's a minor dogmatic point, not like, I'm not saying Jesus isn't God or they didn't rise from the dead. I'm just saying that, like, I don't know about this predestination thing, you know, like maybe I do have free will. And they're like, you what? No, you can't say that. Yeah. And, you know, the response to that is be quiet, or if you won't be quiet, get the fuck out and you can go somewhere else, right? And it is said with that intonation, right? They don't, you know, obviously they're not telling people to get the fuck out, but they mean it, you know? Yeah. And that's why you end up with this very shattered church that is just very separated dogmatically and racially. And, you know, it's a point where like every church is like, oh, if you're this exact kind of person, you can go here and believe what you want. But it's just, it creates a very unwelcoming environment. And I would feel that as I would go into churches, I'd be like, oh, this is whatever this kind of church is. They believe this specific thing. And if I agree with 23 of their 24 dogmatic points, then they're going to tell me to go pound sand, right? And it's just like, it's not the way the church operates in modern day, the Protestant church anyway, that I have a lot of experience with. It is not the welcoming message of Christ of, hey, everyone is welcome to come and to, you know, worship and be together. And as long as you believe like the central point that, you know, Christ is Lord, or that you're like, even just like, hey, I want to learn more about this, right? Like you should be welcome inside the arms of the church, but it's just not that way at all. And it's a point where like silence is like people who believe and people who don't having a war against each other.
Mm-hmm.
But you have those wars within the church itself for people who just believe slightly different things at war with each other. It's fucking wild.
There will always be some kind of tribalism, and it is wild. Like a few other like religious shows and things like Midnight Mass, which is a fantastic exploration of that person who, the main villain of that movie is surprisingly not a fucking vampire. It's that fucking lady who is like the busiest body and is constantly
the church lady.
Yeah, church lady, the active church lady who's just like, fuck all these other people. They're not nearly as pious as I am. They don't deserve the attention or the grace of God. And she has taken the rule set so interpretive and literal, literal in her interpretation, that she just can't look past it to see the actual teachings. And it becomes way more focused on, I need to check off all these boxes of how I live my life. And persecuting other people is part of that, and that's fine. Like, if somebody's a drunk or anything else on this island, they're not a wretched soul in need of help. They're just a wretch, and they fucking deserve to burn in hell. And it becomes like very much it becomes this motivation of, the more that I can potentially persecute them and chastise them for not believing the same way I do, the higher I must be in the graces of God. Mm-hmm. I remember trying to be proselytized to somebody's proselytizing to me in high school. Do you remember Ben? I don't know if you remember that dude.
Oh, yeah. No, Religious Ben, yes.
Yeah, Religious Ben. That's what they called him. Oh, Religious Ben. Religious Ben, folks. That's what they called him. No, he smiled a lot. He was very happy from far. Mm-hmm. When you talk to him, his words had like this sharpened edge to them and how he would use them. And I remember one time I said Jesus' name in vain or some shit. Probably. I've said it so many times now that I just hope that if there is a God, he understands. That's my main kind of like, hey, come on.
If there is a God, hopefully he's not that petty.
Yeah,
right?
that's really what I've come to understand.
Yes.
If there's an omnipresent being out there in the universe, why would they give a shit if I'm like, hey, every so often. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so like, I remember I said that, and Ben came over and he sat with me and he was like, you know that you're going to hell? And it wasn't even because of that. And I was like, yeah? And he's like, well, it's not because of that. We're all going to hell, but like, we can still pray before God that we don't. And I found out that his church was the one where everybody believes they're going to hell all the time, no matter what.
Oh, I've never heard of that church.
It's some weird fucking extremist
I thought I'd been to them all.
Yeah, right?
Well, like a lot of churches, there's a lot of churches like, Jehovah's Witnesses and offsets like that, where there's only a very few spaces in heaven of people that can make it.
Sorry, you can't make it. Heaven is God's omnipresent, but he can't make a big enough space for everybody.
Exactly. So like for the majority of their mass, like they're just not making it to heaven. They're not getting in.
And so everybody is literally competing for the same promotion. It's just like corporate America.
Yeah.
It's not enough budget.
But you have to acknowledge that you're probably going to hell most likely.
And so he was like, well, we're all going to hell, but we're still showing up to church and we're trying to make, maybe one of us will get in or something. And I was like, that is the most depressing way to live in any kind of religion. Yeah. And so like, I remember
like a Sisyphean thing.
Like you just keep trying. And I was like, does that make you a better person? Like, I don't understand, because if you were like, well, I'm going to hell, it reminded me in the same vein of when I saw Last Temptation, I looked up some videos to see like analysis. I just like hearing other people talk about how impactful it was. Mm-hmm. And I found Friars React on YouTube.
God.
And then, so I watched two friars like watch The Last Temptation together. And they paused halfway through to be like, this is completely sacrilegious and unrealistic to like who Jesus was as a person. And they started trying to make this analogy where they were like, Jesus is always divine. And I was like, well, I know he's like 100% man and 100% God, which the math don't add 200%. Up, but he's 200% because that's how divine he can be. And it was one of those things where I'm like, well, if he's 100% man, he's 100% susceptible to the same inclinations and thoughts of man and the same doubts, while he still could have divine power.
Yeah.
Fine. But the friars were like, no, that's not it at all. Like, he should always be divine no matter what because of that. And then they try to use this analogy of like, if you're swimming in a pool and you can see the lead swimmer ahead of you is struggling, would that make you want to try harder to actually keep up with them? Or would it be, if you could never keep up with them, you would always be inspired by them and they would always be a guiding post? And it became one of those things where like Ben reminds me of that, where he's like, you know, I'm always going to drown back here in the waters. But that doesn't stop me from continuing to flail and try to swim as fast as possible. But for me, it's like you could just as easily justify that and say, I'm always going to drown in the water. I might as well drown as deep as I can. Like I can go as hard into the sin as possible. And because I know that I'm going to go to hell, why wouldn't I try to murder somebody or steal things or do this other shit?
I'm going to get forgiven anyway.
There's
like,
that, yeah. So like, hey, there you go. Like, why would I try anymore past a certain point? And to me, like Silence and The Last Temptation both speak to this much more approachable human deity that you can like follow and understand of like, okay, if there is doubt anywhere in this, it's reasonable to feel it. It's like repressing your feelings when people are like, don't feel that way. Just don't. Like bury it deep down. Well, then after a certain point, you fucking commit suicide or you can't reconcile. So you push it on somebody else.
You let it out in a fit of rage.
Yeah, you let it out in a fit of rage. And if you're not able to process it and parse it, then you can't deal with it and reconcile it and grow in your life and in your faith. And I don't feel like you have to give up your religion to live like a good person. I gave up mine, but that doesn't mean that anybody else has to. And had that conversation with several religious people where they end up going to a whataboutism of like, well, what about after you die? Like, and I was like, why would I be focused on the rewards or riches in my afterlife when I'm making people suffer in my current life? It doesn't make sense.
And to say that you're giving up your religion isn't to say that like, you're not giving it up for being you're not giving up your religion in spite of being a good person. You're giving it up for other reasons, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something I always thought about whenever I would be like sitting in church, just like thinking on my, on my ideas and thoughts. And like, if I'm, not this connected to God, is God so forgiving that whenever I, die and go to his gates or whatever, he's going to let me in at the end of the day to think just because, he's supposed to be, a good person. He should be able to possibly judge whether or not like my intentions were good and my, my deeds were good throughout my lifetime, not whether or not like I was devoted to him. And so that was something that like I definitely kind of pushed me towards being not anti-religious, but non-religious throughout my like young adulthood. And I remember being in college and I had a couple of friends who were like militant atheists, very aggressive about it. Yeah. And they
super fun.
Oh, yeah. Always a wonderful crowd.
Salt of the earth.
But, they would always say like, Parker, you're a closet atheist. You're a closet atheist. And I would describe myself as an agnostic because I didn't want to answer the question of whether or not there was a God or whether or not I should be, leading a good life to fulfill his needs, because throughout my thinking and throughout my thought process of going through those ideas and thoughts of saying, like, well, if God, I guess maybe I made an assumption, God should be good, so he would let me in whether or not I am going to be a good person or not. So maybe I shouldn't put as much thought into this this equation as I need to. And, my friends would just say like, oh, you're just hiding from the truth. You don't have a need. And it's so funny because I can, bringing it back to Silence, like you could see them, I see them now as like kind of like the role of Japan and like the Inquisitor, like, you're just doing this as a formality. Yeah. Exactly. Like you're just doing this to appease. So just don't, like, just stop, just don't. And it's so weird to think of like, like there's not a need to be that aggressive about it. But it definitely, it made me think a lot in the, like, going back again to Silence, and it very much is like, what are people willing to do to, make sure that they can just get through at the end of the day and be able to, be comfortable with themselves, Kiichiro, asking for forgiveness, like, what are people able to do just to, keep surviving and staying on their path?
Yeah. I think too, there's this really interesting idea in the movie where Rodriguez has to think about how his religion harms other people, right? And that's something that I think is very prevalent in religions today. Is like especially Christianity has created so much harm in the world, and it's like if at any point you practicing your religion results in other people like inflicting pain on other people, like maybe take a step back,
right,
and think about things, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you look at the church over the past 2,000 years, and it's like, you know, obviously, like you talk about the Crusades, the Inquisition, the like slavery in America, you know, so many things. Obviously, the modern, you know, Catholic priest concerns, and you know, a lot of things there that the church has committed so much sin and done so much evil in the world in the name of Christ, right? Some of it is like, yeah, this priest thing, we're going to bury it and not really talk about it. But some of it is like, oh, the Crusades, like, no, we need to go convert the heathens, and we need to do these things and like slaughter
Capture
a
the
bunch
Holy
of
Land.
Muslims and stuff. And you know, when you start doing things that are harming other people, you know, it's just like how you have to start calling things into question, or at least maybe not the core foundational beliefs, but how you live them, right?
Yeah.
And you know, Rodriguez doesn't actually like change his core belief system. He just learns to live it out in a radically
another
different way
Exactly.
than he ever has before. And I think that's really fascinating. And you know, it's like the church today is, you know, basically just a bought and paid for political institution, and you know, there's this weird melding of like business and oil interests with Christianity that like doesn't really make any sense when you take a few minutes to think about it. But like, it's like, okay, like at what point do I need to rethink these things, right? At what point is it like, you know, maybe I'm 100% pro-life and I believe that abortion is murder, and I'm not saying that like there is not, like, you know, obviously like there's value in human life and we need to think about things from people who are vulnerable and innocent, but like at some point it's like, okay, you know, this is something that perpetuates poverty and that makes people continue to like, you know, it's like if we're not going to have you know, sex education because that's bad, and we're not going to have abortions because that's bad, then we're just going to have poor people having babies and perpetuating poverty. And it's like there's always, you know, an issue, or like, you know, trans bathrooms or whatever the fuck the issue of the day is that the church wants to take a very vehement stance on. That it's like, okay, like I can understand your belief and where you're coming from, but like, have you thought about how that impacts other people and the pain that that's going to cause and the suffering that that's going to create for other people in society? And a lot of times it's people that aren't in those walls of the church, so it's they're not considered, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's pain that's happening elsewhere, and those people need to just get right with God, right? And they need to change, not me.
Well, they won't even consider the pain that's happening inside of their churches either. Like, you know, they didn't consider the pain that was happening to the people of Japan, the hidden Catholics, and they won't consider like the pain of like the you know homosexual Christians or the trans Christians,
or
like,
altar boys.
Yeah, you know,
boys,
exactly. Young children that are, you know, in danger of being put around these people that, you know, probably weren't vested or vetted in the same way that they should have been whenever they're put around youth.
And there's a moment in silence that kind of speaks to this with the translator, where the translator's like telling Rodriguez about the other padre that they like killed before, and how he only ever knew how to say like a really butchered version of thank you, like, and Rodriguez is like, I'm not him, but like Rodriguez doesn't fucking know any Japanese, like doesn't know any of that, and he was like, you never bothered to come here and like actually learn from us. We've been learning from you though, like everything that you do, we've learned from.
The Portuguese language was a gift of your father Cabral. I've been asked to interpret on your behalf. There was concern that we might miss certain subtleties in your testimony if you were told to speak only in Japanese.
The testimony,
We wanted to be fair. And we do have a better grasp of your language than you do of ours. Father Cabral never managed much more than arigataya. All the time he lived here, he taught, but would not learn. He despised our language, our food, our customs.
I'm not like him. I'm not like Cabral.
Really?
Yes.
We have our own religion, Padre. Pity you did not notice it.
And it's that like same, you know, there's a lack of empathy within the church's walls in trying to learn about something else, because there's to put it in like a very aggressive way, it's kind of like a know thy enemy. If you really are trying to convert somebody or pick something, you should try to know who they are, or what they are, like what they believe before you even try to pick that apart. But that like risks creating empathy. I feel like, and that's why there's no entertainment for it. And it's one of those things where
you have to put your pride aside to do something like that.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it just becomes, everybody would much rather grandstand now on like any social media platform about how shit the liberal party is, the conservative party, or fucking anybody. They just assume and project onto somebody, prescribe who they are so that they can have a straw man. And then they destroy that with their fucking arguments that don't get anybody except for their own echo chamber into their camp. Whereas I've always kind of loved the philosophy of like, can we just go to a library together and try to read a few books and be like, what the fuck? Did you see this passage? Did you see this? Like, because you would start to grow and understand. And there's so many other movies, books, like stories about two enemies in a war that get trapped in a foxhole together.
Yeah.
And how eventually they have to learn to either live together or they kill each other. And if they like learn to live together, then it's like, wow, we're not so different, you and I. And it's like, that's perpetuated all of humanity for so long. It's wild that people still fall into the trapping of like, nah, fuck that. This person's just pure evil and malevolent. And even with the Padres, I felt that watching the movie, there's kind of that, I don't know which I would prefer, to know that somebody is intentionally malicious. Like I was thinking about the church and economics and how like, they're an extension of just corporate greed and mining and like colonialism.
And tax-free, baby.
Tax-free.
Oh, I love it.
And so it becomes like this whole thing of like, but the Padres seem so earnest and dedicated in their conviction. And it's like, you know, you have probably, it's like that Simpsons thing where Milhouse is like, but why would anybody have a soul, Bart? And like the reverend's in the other room, like, I can't hear you cleaning, boys, like dumping coins and shit into the counter. But it's that thing of like, there are innocents still wrapped up in the system.
Yeah.
And like, if they were to understand the plight of the people they're trying to convert, maybe they can push change up. But the people at the top have like a maliciousness to them. And I'm just like, can't reconcile it at times. And it becomes very frustrating. So I'm like, are you really doing this out of the pureness of your heart? Or do you have the ulterior motive of wanting something else out of it? And like Silence, just, it is that like, you going to really actually try to learn from us? Or are you just here to convert and capture and expand your territory?
Building on that, that same conversation between Rodriguez and the interpreter, I think there's that initial conversation, there's so much interesting information that's passed back and forth. And he says, you know, he tells him, oh yeah, Ferreira is, you know, he is living as a Japanese now. He publicly renounced the faith and he's actually held in very high esteem, which I believe is why he came here in the first place.
Yeah.
That is just a biting piece of dialogue.
Oh yeah.
You know, you like the goal of the missionaries is to gain glory for themselves and for the church, right? And it's a very selfish endeavor to go somewhere else and say, hey, I'm right, you're wrong. You need to believe what I believe, and I'm not going to try to learn what you know. And you know, you mentioned the language issues and how like the priests don't try to learn Japanese at all, but they expect everyone around them to know Portuguese, right?
Yeah.
And they just assume that, oh yeah, like you should learn our ways because we know better. We're more civilized, you know, whatever. And it's just so like, and then they give the mass in fucking Latin, right? And it's like, that's something that the church was doing for, you know, until like what, the fucking like 1900s or something?
So no, just like 60 years ago.
Like very recently we're giving all masses in Latin. And it's like, at what point are you like, first of all, why is that the like holy language that they chose? Jesus didn't fucking speak it. Like it's just so weird to me.
It's the Roman part of the Roman Catholic.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, you're just gonna everybody speak what we speak. And so like you have priests preaching the gospel in a language that no one can understand, right? And so there's like a purposeful effort to keep congregations ignorant, right? And you know, that was one thing that, you know, again, made me really pissed and made me, you know, kind of have this existential crisis was like every little church with their specific dogma, they will cite certain verses that promote their dogma, and they will not acknowledge the ones
just ignore it
that put evidence against what they believe. And so you end up being like, okay, we're going to do a 3-week series on predestination and, you know, fuck the Austin Stone, the local mega church here. They're like, here's all the reasons you should believe this, and here's all the verses that support it. And they just completely ignore the verses that talk about free will.
Yeah.
You know, it's fucking bullshit. And, you know, like that attitude has been in the church for all time, you know, and you have these missionaries going to Japan and like, hey, you should believe this wonderful good news. Here, we're going to, by the way, learn Portuguese, and also we're going to preach to you in fucking Latin.
Yep.
Like, it's just so fucking stupid.
The disconnect from the disconnect, because it's always about power. It's about maintaining and controlling power. And like the priests don't even realize it because they're so enthralled by like their faith whenever they get there.
They can't view the world outside of the bubble that they have been brought up in, and they don't know how to react when that's taken away.
They don't even recognize that they're eating like a bowl of this fish whenever each other person is getting one fish apiece. And like
that scene where they forget to say the prayer
and
before
they forget
eating.
oh
my god.
And Rodriguez spits out the fish beforehand. Yeah, exactly. Like they don't realize the power that they hold until they get there, and then they start actually like wielding it a little bit, and they realize like, oh, we do have authority over these people, we have control over them. And then, you know, like Garupe's like, you know, what if we did leave? We could have saved these people possibly. And Rodriguez is like, no, you can't think like that. Like, don't doubt. Like, that's the one time Garupe starts to doubt. And Rodriguez immediately comes in on the other side to play devil's advocate.
He says, if we doubt, that will be the death of us.
Immediately.
Like, oh man, that is the perfect, like, summation of his beliefs at that time, and the perfect summation of the beliefs of a lot of Christians modern day. It's like if you admit that you might be wrong, that is the first step down the slippery slope to hell. You're going right straight down.
You know, not to bring Herbert into it, but you know, fear is the mind killer.
There you go.
But you know, Herbert did, you know, do a lot of religious studies, and so like obviously like that is a very like common theme in religion. Like, you know, if you doubt, then we could lose control over you. We could lose that power.
You betray the doctrine. You speak heretically. Like
bad things could happen.
That'll destabilize what we need. That's again why Jesus was crucified, and like, you know, it's why anybody pretty much gets persecuted. It's because like you're speaking some kind of truth to power, or you're speaking
you're fucking with somebody's money.
You're fucking with somebody's money. That's pretty much what it is.
Oh man,
that's why the church wants you to be ignorant, right? Like they only want to spoon feed you the verses that believe what they say is right, because like they're terrified that you might read for yourself and learn something outside of what they want you to know, and then you might leave and stop giving them your tithes every week.
I mean, there was a whole like pushback against democratizing the Bible whenever that was actually being they're trying to find the consensus,
the King James print,
what the King James print should be, and people were like, the peasants shouldn't have this shit. This should be in the pulpit only. This should only be for some kind of for a preacher to really tell them, because then they'll get their own ideas.
It's pretty fucking
like,
fascist.
Right? It's so fucking fascist.
Like a lot of peasants didn't even know how to read before the Bible was printed. It's crazy, you know, like printing was happening, but it wasn't until like the Bible did it that people were like, oh shit, you know what? Maybe I do want to learn what's inside this book, so that way I can ask the priest some questions, because he keeps bringing up a specific verse every single time I have a question about another thing.
You can't let people read for themselves, because then you have Nat Turner happen.
Yep. Yeah.
Whoops.
That's bad. Oh, rebellions. No, we don't like that.
I don't know. I think like we could talk forever about this movie. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to bring up that, you know, stood out to you about the film?
Shout outs to the cinematography again. The
Rodrigo Prieto is so good.
I did not realize that like he did Brokeback Mountain, and then pretty much after he did this movie, Scorsese was like, no, I'm just going to use you for the rest of my movies. So that's cool. That's really cool. He did a great job. Did a lot of like very Kurosawa-esque callbacks. I think the first, like right after the title card, I shouted to John, "What in the Kurosawa is this?" Because there's just a lot of very like large, like open shots where like there's a lot of like human movement. They used a lot of people, a lot of like cast members to be able to like have scenes adjust throughout the like just the beautiful landscape that they were filming in.
Yeah.
Scorsese was friends with Kurosawa, and he acted in Dreams.
Shit. That's right. Yeah, he's Van Gogh.
He actually read Silence when he was in Japan filming Dreams.
Nice. Oh, damn.
Yeah, and then was trying to make it for like 27 years.
That's what I read. Yeah, he's been trying to make this movie for a very long time. And the author of the movie, or the author of the original book, Shukasu Endo, was a Japanese Catholic, and like most of his writing is very like Catholic based. He himself was converted when he was like 11, like in the 1920s, right before like World War II broke out and everything. And he like traveled all around the world and stuff, just like learning like writing and stuff like that. And it's pretty interesting. Like it's weird to think about this movie. Going into it and watching it, I saw it as like the perspective of the Portuguese coming in. So like you have that kind of like perspective of being Andrew Garfield's character, but like
but it's
learning that the author is coming much more from the perspective of like the people living through it. It definitely like kind of like puts a hammer to the nail of like how much it really depicts like how much these people were suffering and like all of the like just ridiculous things that they had to go through.
Yeah. I've read the novel and it's fucking great. Like Endo is a really good writer. It was written in 1966 in Japan, and he is thought of as like one of the great Japanese novelists, and Silence is thought of as his masterwork. I haven't read his other stuff, but Scorsese has said that his next movie he wants to make based on another Shusaku Endo novel called The Life of Jesus, and I'm fascinated to see what that would be. He said he wants it to be like an 85-minute movie.
Man.
Very different than what Scorsese's been doing for the past 30 years.
Yeah.
But, I like the novel is really great, and the movie is an incredibly faithful adaptation of the novel. It's really well done. And then there's also a Japanese movie that came out in 1971 that I watched for the first time a couple days ago.
Oh.
And it's really well done. I don't think it's quite as visceral and powerful as Scorsese's version. It's a little bit more reserved in its filmmaking style, and it takes some liberties with the story that I think didn't really work for me as well as just kind of taking the novel and putting it on screen. But
apparently
it's interesting. Like when a book is made into a movie, it's like, a lot of people are like, well, the book was better or whatever. It's like, for me, usually it's like whatever version of it I interact with first is the one. Whatever makes me want to experience it in another medium, it's like
the first,
that one is like, oh yeah, I loved this, so I'm gonna watch the movie now, or I'm gonna read the book now. It's like whatever the second version of it I encounter, I'm like, this is good, but it wasn't quite as good as that first one.
It's not that burgeoning.
And it's like Silence was, had just such a powerful impact on me personally, the movie, that it's like I will always hold Scorsese's version as like the best version of this story, but the novel is fucking incredible, and the Japanese version of the film is very good as well.
They said they rewrote it like multiple times because Scorsese was not happy with just like how it felt. He said it wasn't like giving the emotion of the book, the novel, as much as he wanted to. So he kept like waiting until he was able to find new ways to display that through the medium of film.
Yeah, so Scorsese and his co-writer Jake Hawks wrote like dozens of versions of the script over decades,
20 years
until they
or something.
finally became comfortable that they could tackle the subject matter. Yeah.
Very crazy.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add. I think we've covered it.
Yeah.
John, would you recommend this movie?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would. It's a fucking great meditation on religion and identity and belief, and it's great. It's a good time. It's fucking brutal though, so just be ready for that.
Yeah,
it is a rough watch.
Yeah.
Parker?
Meditation is right. Yeah, I would definitely recommend this as well. It is it's something that you want to sit down and just experience all by itself with no distractions, no no interaction with anything else, trying to, just embrace all of it, and, be prepared to explore.
Yeah. And I would obviously recommend this. I said at the top, it's my favorite movie. It's had a profound impact on my life, and I would definitely recommend that anybody check it out. Even if you don't come from a Christian background, I think it's just a fascinating film about perspective and culture clashes and things that everybody has to deal with, right? When your own belief system is challenged and you have to reckon with that. Yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about Scorsese. Like, I think, he's just an incredible filmmaker, and so many people view him as the gangster movie guy, and it's like, if somebody on Twitter starts to talk about how great Martin Scorsese is, some idiot reply guy is like, oh, you mean the guy that just makes gangster movies over and over again? And it's like, that is actually a fairly small percentage of his filmography, and he's made so many really great movies about a wide variety of topics, but like literally every movie that he has ever made has religious undertones to it, and that is clearly the topic that has motivated him in his career more than anything else is Christianity and ideas of sin and failure and redemption, and the profane versus the sacred, and how you reconcile those things together. And I think Silence feels like the movie that he was always meant to make, that he was building toward in his career, and I think it's just such a powerful piece of art that I would just recommend anyone to check it out. So thank you so much for joining us on Afterthoughts. I have been your host, Michael Dixon. With me, as always,
John Garcia. I don't know if I can go after that. Just silence.
Silence.
Very fitting.
Silence.
And
Parker Curtis.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
And I have once again still been your host, Michael Dixon. Thank you so much for putting up with my bullshit.
Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.